Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's special council meeting on May the 8th. People interested in participating in this meeting were eligible to register online using the delegation registration form at www.kitchener.ca/delegation or via email at delegation.ca. Any written comments that were received prior to today's meeting have been forwarded to council and will form part of the public record. And anyone interested in watching the live stream and archive videos, they are available at www.kitchener.ca/watchnow. As we begin this morning's meeting, I'd like to begin, as we always do, by acknowledging that this morning we're gathering on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We recognize our responsibility to serve as stewards for the land and honor the original caretakers who came before us. Our community is enriched by the enduring knowledge and deep-rooted traditions of the diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in Kitchener today. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? There not appearing to be any. And since there aren't any delegations, I won't read that piece. And before we go on to the strategic session, I will just take the motion to go in camera for the items listed. Moved by Councillor Clancy, seconded by Councillor Davey. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you. And we will now then go to part one of our strategic session, which is the Corporate Climate Action Plan, and I will turn it over to Anne-Marie Cipriani. I will note if folks can hold their questions until the end of the presentation, and then we'll open the floor to any questions of council. So with that, over to you, Anne-Marie.
Thank you. Good morning, Council. It's good to be with you today in person.
Yeah, this is the first time we see you in person. Welcome.
It's in the hot seat, right? First time in person. Last time I could hide a bit behind a camera and a screen. Okay, so I want to introduce you to a staff team who are with me and who have been supporting this work. And so I want you to listen to the titles of the rules as well, because there's some pointer, some kind of indication of how this work is shifting for our organization. So Matthew Lynch at the far end there, Director of Fleet. Beside him, brand new hire, Luke Reeser-Keller, Project Manager, Energy Management. Beside him is Assad Qureshi, Director of Facilities Management. Beatrice Powell, Manager, Facilities Asset and Energy Management. And Kate Daly, closest to me here, Senior Strategist, Carbon and Energy Planning. So there are two at this table, Luke and Kate, for whom today is their first day here in chamber with you as well. And so I want to introduce this team to you. It is, well, part of your staff team that is working in an integrated way across the organization to take the work that will be signaled today and start the work of in earnest, developing a plan that we'll get into in a moment. So let's begin. Alrighty, so an overview. Our mayor and chair had mentioned that what I really need today in this beginning part of the session is 15 minutes to convey to you some information is really important that I get across to you. And we will then move into a Menti session. In that Menti session, there will be 3 really focused questions where you'll be given an agreement scale and you'll be asked to do the agreement scale. In the 4th question, it will be more open-ended. It'll be a moment that we can shift into a bit of quiet reflection as you enter information into that Menti scale of the Menti open-ended question. From there, we will shift into a more roundtable open discussion. And that'll be the really beautiful opportunity in this session to share what it is that you're seeing, that you wish to see in a plan as we move forward, okay? And so that is how, in general, this session will be set up. So looking at what I'll cover in these first 15 minutes, I'm going to provide for you a really brief overview of a climate change primer. My intention is that so that we're kind of all on the same page and understanding how it is that we're orienting to the work and a bit of why. Then we'll recap what we have been doing as an organization within this community. I'll then take you into our corporate greenhouse gas emission profile, because that begins to illuminate a lot more. There are some specific calls to action for you to consider, and these are about priorities for this work as we move forward and target setting. And then, as I said, we'll open up into a more roundtable opportunity for sharing. So let's begin with the climate change primer. Alrighty, so what we understand about climate change and where our focus is right now is that we use fossil fuels as a source of energy. As we burn those fossil fuels, we release greenhouse gas emissions. And primarily, we often really look at methane and carbon dioxide. These greenhouse gas emissions, as they're emitted, create a blanket over the Earth, and they really prevent radiant heat from escaping. And hence you hear the term, and have heard the term, global warming and climate change. So this is why, in our work, there is such a focus on fossil fuels, and in particular, in an energy transition. In 2015, across our communities within our region, there was modeling work that was done to better understand what our community is likely to look at in the face of climate change. What we understand is that our community will be warmer, wetter, and wilder. What we are seeing across the globe is global surface temperatures are increasing 1.1 degrees already from our post-industrial time, pre-industrial time. And we talk about this threshold of 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees. When we hit or exceed these thresholds that we speak of, it's a point at which it is understood that we will face the worst impacts of climate change. What we've come to understand is that we need deep, rapid, and sustained greenhouse gas emissions to not meet those worst impacts. What we've also recently come to understand is that what is needed is net zero emissions before mid-century. So when we talk about the net part of net zero, what I mean by that is that we need to reduce our corporate greenhouse gas emissions to as close to zero as possible, with any remaining GHGs being reabsorbed from the atmosphere. So in light of all that, we have been working on this portfolio. And so I'd like to take you through this next slide that will share a little bit, I'll highlight a little bit of the work that we have been doing. So there really are 4 domains that we talk about. One is adaptation. And so adaptation is really about managing the risks of climate change and its impacts. Mitigation is about reducing emissions. So we have corporate emissions, which are the emissions that we, as an organization, emit while delivering core service to the community. And community emissions are those emissions we see across our jurisdictional area, across our region, that come from all sectors and that are here, some of which we have some control over. And so when we look at corporate and community, today's focus is really on our corporate emissions. So as I said, we have been working over a number of years on this portfolio. It has been approximately 10 years that that's been the case. The community scope work has undergone 2 generations of work. Our corporate work has gone through 1 generation, and we closed out our first corporate climate action plan in March of last year. Where we're at today, I'd suggest is a real opportunity to renew our corporate commitment with deeper reductions, to deeper targets, and perhaps better align with the magnitude of community targets. So when we speak of this work today, and I want to give you a bit of a glimpse of looking forward to the entire scope of the project, we talk about Part 3, and adaptation is a focus for Part 3 that will come, yet to come. Part 2 is what you'll be starting to hear of in the days to come and the weeks to come. So a focus there will be on community demand for energy, but also on corporate supply of energy. Today's focus will be on Part 1. Part 1 is corporate energy demand. and this really will be what we begin to dive into, is this part 1 of the Corporate Climate Action Plan 2.0. Alrighty, so a little bit of context. Our corporate greenhouse gas emissions are a subset of the community greenhouse gas emissions. I like to look at corporate GHGs as our corporate responsibility. I'd like now to take you into the organization to begin to see our corporate greenhouse gas emissions. So when we look at this pie chart, we can see that there are 2 focus areas in particular. So in general, for the purposes of today, we talk about 4 focus areas, but there are 2 that contribute the most amount of greenhouse gases to our corporate greenhouse gas inventory. And you can see that facilities and fleet and equipment indeed contribute the most. In fact, over 90% of our corporate greenhouse gas emissions come from these 2 focus areas. When we look at this graph, and if we look at where there is the star and the bars of graph that illustrate a bit more about facilities, we begin to see that in particular arenas play a very important role and contribution to our corporate greenhouse gas emissions, followed by pools and administrative buildings. For me, when I then look at the bottom bar, at our fleet and equipment, I really begin to wonder about fuel types. And so, looking further into fuel types or sources of energy, we begin to see that natural gas is an important fuel type currently within our facilities. Primarily, it's really important for space heating and domestic hot water. Gasoline and diesel also play a really important role currently in our fleet and equipment. So gasoline, as you're likely quite familiar with, is quite important in what I would call smaller vehicles, and can more so readily currently be converted to electric vehicles. Diesel vehicles, I relate to them being typically used by much larger vehicles, and on the horizon, they're not as readily able to be electrified. What we see in the industry and in the marketplace is that in approximately 5 years or so, those type of particularly fuel cell vehicles will become available in the marketplace. So then looking at this graph in this way now, we can begin to see that natural gas plays a really important role currently in our facilities, and that in our fleet and equipment, gasoline and diesel plays an important role in our facilities currently. But not all fuel types are created equally, and so there's more that we can begin to really focus on. When we look at the top graph on the left, we can begin to see that electricity is a source of 46% of all the energy we use, yet it accounts for only currently 10% of our GHG emissions. When we look at natural gas by comparison, it's 33% of our energy used corporately and accounts for 44% of our corporate GHGs. And also similarly, diesel and gasoline and somewhat propane is a source of 21% of the total energy that we use, and it accounts for 39% of our corporate GHGs. So for me, these slides really illustrate that transitioning to lower carbon fuel sources, energy sources, can make an impact, and they're an important focus in the work as we move forward ahead. So two focus areas that emerge that we've talked about today is facilities and fleet, and that's our corporate facilities and corporate fleet and equipment. And in our Transform Waterloo Region work, there were 3 pathways that were pointed to, that were key pathways for deep, sustained GHG reductions. And so I think they're best bets for our organization and our community. And the first pathway is energy conservation. And so understanding that we need to use less, demand less energy, and use what we use more efficiently. Fuel switching, converting to low carbon sources of energy, and generating energy, generating local, clean, renewable energy. So these are what I think, as from what I can see in working with our staff and beginning to really dive deeper into our organization, are priorities for the work that we need to bring to the work in order to make progress that will be sustained. So when we look at our corporate commitments to date, in our first generation corporate climate action plan, we had an 8% greenhouse gas emission reduction target. We closed that plan out last year. The community work, as I've mentioned previously, has been through 2 generations. And so this plan has currently a council-endorsed 80 by 50 focus and a 50 by 30 focus. I think we have an opportunity with this work now for this second generation of corporate climate action work to better align with our community target in terms of the magnitude of commitment. The climate work that we did, this 80 by 50 target, was done 5 years ago. And a lot of understanding and a lot of change in the landscape of this understanding has happened over the last 5 years. In the IPCC, so the International Panel on Climate Change, in their most recent report, it is quite clear that we need to aim for, to work towards net zero emissions by mid-century. Again, in pointing to the word net, what I mean by that is reducing our corporate greenhouse gas emissions to as close to zero as possible, any remaining emissions being reabsorbed from the atmosphere. This intention, this guidepost, would really be to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, to enable deep, rapid, and sustained reductions. But it is going to take strategic, systemic, and deeply integrated changes to corporate processes, business planning, and policies. And so these calls to action, these priorities, would be embedded within this new direction. So this project, its next steps, are really to begin to develop the plan. And we would return to council, hoping for near year end, with a new plan for endorsement. Where we will take now, this time together, is we will open it up to Menti, and I'll give you a bit of guidance just to guide us through this. So we will shift into the Menti, and the first 3 questions are an agreement scale, and they point to the questions you saw in your report, and they point to the priorities that I've outlined today and some of the rationale as to what we're seeing as to why this direction is something, that I'd love to hear your feedback on through this Menti. For each question, we will in turn vote and then in turn display the results, but we won't yet have discussion about them. I'd really like to keep the discussion to the round table to really support the opportunity for everyone to share in the time we're given. So let's is everyone successfully into the Menti? Anyone not? Okay, we have 1 counselor so far with a challenge.
Are we taking questions first?
No, we'll dive into the Menti, and unless you have.
I think we probably want to do
questions?
questions
Okay.
from council first, and then we'll go into the
That's fine.
into the Menti.
Okay.
Because this is the end of your presentation, right? Yeah. Okay. So questions from council. Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and you presented really well. I appreciate that. You're talking about a lot of scary topics with a very calming voice. That makes it easier for us to digest this. And when I say scary topics, obviously the most evident is climate change, but the also more realistic is the financial aspects about what's required of us to meet some of the recommendations that would arise from this. So even looking at question number 1, and glad that I got the opportunity to ask, because we may not have been able to come back while answering these questions, It's very easy to say net zero by 2050 as a priority of this council, and we've done this too often where everything looks fantastic and in principle sounds right and responsible for this council to do, and we commit to it. And then there's a substantive sticker shock after the fact. And how do we ensure that the commitments that we make today are also financially viable as well? So if you can try to talk about an aspect of sustainability work that can be self-paying, self-funding, of this priorities, initiatives that would be taken to invest as well, that can give returns, and then try to meet. And the other thing is, where do we align within, I'll look to Mr. Mayor, I think, is it 29 big cities across Canada, or 26? Whichever the number.
So FCM-wise, it's 23, and
23, okay.
I think it's 29 or 30 provincially.
Okay. So anyways, provincially and even nationally, where do we land with the priorities that we have set forward and this next iteration of our strategic plan? The very least from my perspective, you know, it's great to lead, but again, it comes with substantive responsibility too, and some of it, I mean, we have very difficult financial decisions ahead with, you know, just a changing landscape. So that would be helpful to see exactly where we land. And this is a question not necessarily for me, I get it, but I have to answer it on behalf of this council, the priorities that are chosen to our constituents, who will very, you know, as a common reply back or retort back will be, well, what's China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, Russia doing in comparison, and what efforts we take, what will that have any impact in comparison if they choose the current path that they're leading already without making some serious changes as what's being recommended by us? Thank you.
Thanks. So through you, the chair, to Councillor Singh. So indeed, you know, nationally, the indicators are also for net zero by mid-century. And so we understand generally that this is the case. This is what we need to aim for to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And so knowing what we need to do it. And it is, how do we do it? How do we make this not just pie in the sky conversation? Targets are cheap. I often say that they can be cheap because they can be lip service only. So I want to assure you that as this plan moves forward, my intention is for that not to be the case. And part of why the staff team is here is because I understand a ground truth and real integrated aspect that's grounded is important. And so in each of these areas, as we move forward, we will have a much more granular sense of the work ahead and the costs. So some will say there is a cost of doing nothing, which is true, and there's the cost of meeting the challenge, like every challenge. So I, in my role, meet both of those realities. So there will be further modeling as we look at particular actions that become clear. And so that more granular, realistic sense will be put forward in that new corporate climate action plan of how it is that we will be able, with greater clarity, greater granularity, answer those questions. Some of the projects that you've seen already been done, like our streetlight conversion, for instance, we saw returns on investment. They were significant. So it was a 69% reduction in energy use from 2016 to 2020. Pretty no-brainer, right? That is going to save, and we are seeing those savings. And really strategic moves of this leadership, even compared to counterpart municipalities, was to do something with those funds that would then get reinvested into the work that we're doing. And so you may remember that we have a reserve fund. And so those savings, as one project, there are others, but that one project gets fed in to support the further work. Now, that's important. And I think that that kind of strategic, and when I describe, you know, that we need to have really integrated strategic approaches to this work, that's an example of it. That was, from my sense, your senior leadership seeing an opportunity and taking it, and for the betterment of this work. So, not all of the work that's going to be ahead of us is going to have ROI. And so what's really important to watch for is that can't be the only indicator of the work that we need to do. So That's also part of what has to be balanced in this work, and part of those folks who are into the work and who will know it best, whether we're in a facility and replacing HVAC in one or all of our facilities. They're going to have a very good sense of all of the interconnected components that touch that. But there may not be a ready ROI in terms of, it saved money on fuel, right? That may not always be the case. And so part of this transition that has to happen with how we make decisions will be that ROI likely is not the only factor we're looking at. And so as part of your question, I think what we'll take into advisement is what are those other indicators that as an organization we will be also good to look at as we move forward. Because it is a part of, within our finance team as well, I would think, a part of the integrated way we need to look at this decision-making. Does that answer everything for you, Councillor Singh?
Yeah, you've gone fairly in-depth.
Okay.
I want to give others opportunity to ask. They don't have some more questions.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Councillor Clancy.
Thank you. I guess I'm going to take kind of that line of conversation a little further, because I think when we had our budget meetings, sometimes we're comparing apples and tennis rackets, and so I find that when we can use some of this data, and even though, don't get me wrong, we don't always get that 3%, 5% gain, but I know some of the times we're looking at a 5% payoff, or 5-year, taking projects that are 5 years, and how can we build in more flexibility, but also recognize the financial gains that can be made. So like, for example, when we had our chat about greening our equipment for the parks, we weren't also looking at the fact that those will pay themselves off in about 8 years. So that kind of data can be really helpful. And I'd also love to hear, because there's so many layers to the work you're doing that I think affect the quality of life of people in Kitchener. So when I think of arenas, for example, if we switch a Zamboni off of natural gas, it actually improves the overall health and wellness of our staff who are exposed to really high levels of fumes in that building. So, there's health benefits too to us having a greener city, greening our fleet, that has a benefit to our staff. So, that to me helps us when we have to bite a bullet of making a significant investment. And we also, we invest a lot of money in stuff that might actually be fossil fuel investments in stocks in our GICs, right? So that might give a 3% gain. So how do we take a 3% gain that we're investing in fossil fuels and switch it over? And some of those little nuances really kind of help us when we're making those decisions, so that we can kind of see the bigger picture in some of the financial investments we're making. So that's just, I don't know if that wasn't a question, so yeah. But yeah, I don't want to, you guys are you also have lots on your plate. So how do we, I guess my question is, how do we balance the kind of need for some of this data and information in order for us to make decisions on many layers, financial and otherwise, and climate and health, but not overwhelm your team with requests for reports? So yeah, what's your recommendation on how we can leverage that?
Through the chair to Councillor Clancy. So thank you, for some insight in terms of where you're coming from and how you see this work. I think what is really important to many of the points that you've raised is in particular the aspect of refining our focus and integrating that refined focus into decision making. So as an example, when we are clear as an organization what our priorities are, so if there are priority areas, be they facilities and fleet and equipment, that enables us to have a clearer and refined focus. It enables us to take the work and the discussion with the capacity that we have deeper and better able to refine the types of reporting to feed that strategic conversation. And so this is really kind of at the crux of why I bring to you today, the areas that I'm seeing that we need to focus on so that we can best inform decision making. And reporting is one of those pieces. And so that we can look in these teams as they integrate their work, as they work on the ground, on the ice in the arena, as they work in capital planning and state of good repair and in asset management, all of these pieces, they can bring back and start to pull the data that we have, but in a way that fosters informed decision making. That's part of what I need in order to be able to make that happen within the organization.
And the only other thought, thank you, that was lovely. That makes it clear that as we focus, it makes it easier to kind of dig in those areas. And the only other thing was, I know we're looking at like the carbon emissions of energy sources right now, but I said this when Sustainable WR came, that we know that our electricity grid is getting dirtier, and so how do we make sure that as we look forward, we take that into consideration, that yes, electricity is clean now, but could we, maybe build in more storage, or like, look at our energy generation locally as a way to offset some of the carbon emissions in our grid.
Yep. So continuing through the chair. So the aspect of council's role in advocacy, that is a role for council to take on as an organization as appropriate, and to continue to advocate for what's in the best interest of our municipality and municipalities across the nation. And part of that is advocating about the energy grid and how it is now and how it could become one day. So uncertainty is such a reality, I think, in all of the work municipalities do, but it's maybe very obvious in this climate work because there are many things that can change that we can't control. So a couple things that are important on that is ensuring that your staff, your subject matter experts, are positioned to be able to continue to know about changes that are coming. So you guys would be advocating at your level within your scope of influence and ensuring your staff are in the places and in the know so that we can be as agile an organization as we can be. On that note of integration in terms of things changing, it's really important that as we are, for instance, capital planning, we understand how there is a level of uncertainty in all of the work that we do, and that our plans, right, are moving forward in the most well-informed way possible with what we understand today, looking at patterns and signals of where we may be. And so this is the really important part of the work and relationship between your scope of influence as a council, senior leaders, and their scope of influence, and our work as staff. And that's, I think, really key to how that integrated effort of this work is needed, because not any one of us can make, the agility that's necessary to meet the uncertainty possible without that strong relationship and common focus.
Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Schneider, you're up next.
Thank you, Mayor. You mentioned how the streetlight conversion provided savings that we could reinvest. Do you know of any other, like off the top of the head, maybe low-hanging fruit of greenhouse gas lowering methods that could also bring savings that could be reinvested? Certain things, maybe you could share some of those?
From my understanding, the reality of the low-hanging fruit is coming to an end. And the types of work, projects that need to be done are not of that nature. And to Councillor Singh's, question, this is really part of the, I don't know, did you use the word scary, terrifying, I don't know. This is part of that triggering work. And so for all of us in our different scopes of influence, there may be this aspect of different triggering things. This is, my understanding, a reality of the gravity of the work and the situation, is that the low-hanging fruit is mostly, few and far between. There are some opportunities in some buildings, some facilities, to be able to make these shifts, but they're becoming fewer and far between. I'm confident that as we do our capital planning and our retrofits, that we will see that. And in our fleet and equipment, we know what needs to be done with vehicles as possible. And the returns on investment there are through labor and through fuel savings. So those are probably as low hanging as it comes, doing some more LED work in particular buildings. But the heavier hitting items that are needed will not have that kind of ROI that street lighting project so beautifully illustrates.
What about partnerships? A lot of us have sat on the hydro board, and I know ANOVA now, Consolidated, are always looking for ways to move things forward. Is that a possibility?
Yep, so partnerships are key. The reality of the sustainability work in general is that it's all collaboratively done. That's part of the tragedy of commons, that not one party, not one sector can do it on their own. So as an example, there are 4 of us on the call last week from this grouping of staff meeting with Innova. You know, we will be meeting quarterly with them as we better understand and work to better understand together what there is as possibilities within partnerships. Much of the work, the way we have typically done it decades ago in silos or independently, isn't going to work as we move forward. So partnerships, some of which relationships that you will be leading, that our senior leaders will be leading, that our staff will be involved in, that's what's key, is those relationships that you all maintain. Without that, we'll be in a silo and we will not be successful on our own. Not one municipality will be.
That's great to hear, and I'm hoping too there could be, do you think there'd be some partnerships with the development industry to create net zero housing, like net zero neighborhoods, to get it at the start?
So net zero development, right, has been something that we all have been working on together. There are examples. So we have worked through the FCM, Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Green, like their investment fund, to look at net zero possibilities. And so we can see in the Bram Yards project here that was one of the, at the time, plots of land that we put forward to the study. So some of it is feasibility work. And for sure, those relationships, again, are possible. They're possible through partnerships like that I gave you, through FCM, through 4 municipalities on that particular project. And now that project is moving forward with some benefit from that initial net zero feasibility study work that was done.
Great. And do you think that could be applied to retrofitting as well?
Yes, and so we have engaged in that work already across our region, and so we have completed again through the same funding source across all of the upper tier and lower tier municipalities, looking at retrofitting neighborhoods, and so it is, and also bringing in the lens of equity to understand energy poverty. So those, for instance, who are spending greater than 6% on their energy bill. And so we can start to use data and work with other partners, so other levels of our municipal counterparts, to deliver programming in our community that is within the scope of the community scope. And so today's focus is really on our corporate GHGs. The question, this last question that you've pointed to, really points to community GHGs, both of which are important. Part 2 of the Corporate Climate Action Plan will focus on the community scope to your question.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Davey.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and Councillor Schneider, your questions lead in closely to mine. So I'll start with that. This is coming with a big price tag, and I guess the first question I would have is if we would apparently be blowing the bank on our corporate GHGs, have we looked, I guess the one question I always ask when these issues come forward is the best bang for the buck in terms of GHG reduction internally or externally? Because one of the fears that I have is, if we spend excess dollars reducing fewer amounts of GHGs when we could be doing some of the things like Councillor Schneider said, and reduce the overall envelope. So has there been work done in exploring that?
Yeah. So with the one slide that was on the screen, you can see, right, that our corporate emissions, maybe less than 1% of our community emissions. The reality is that every organization across our community, across every sector, contributes their 1%. So when I look at that which we are responsible for in our municipal, core delivery of service to the community, that's a cost, in a sense, in our contribution of doing business at this time. It is what I would describe as our corporate responsibility. Part of this work, and one of the, your question is a really tangible one, and one that we all have to grapple with. It's part of the tragedy of commons. If we do not do our part, that which is within our scope of control, we don't contribute that percentage. And likewise, our counterparts in municipalities across our community, they're 1%. And this is the crux of the tragedy of the commons. Our atmosphere is a shared resource, and like every shared resource and every, similar story that has gone before this time, it is our responsibility. And it is, so they are equally important because they are inextricably linked. And that is part of the challenge that we all face in our decision-making about this work. If we don't, right, there is no one else to do that which is within our scope of control.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, I understand that. And in the financial implications, it indicates $250 million over 10 years. Is that on top of, like, I'm just a little unclear, because our current commitment is 80 by 50. So would that number go down if it was not net zero in terms of commitment, or is it on top of an amount of money?
So the $250 million is a very rough estimate that was coming from modeling for a set of actions within facilities and fleet, and looking at what was likely some of the next work over the next decades in these facilities and with regards to fleet. Very rough estimate. And so that number was modeled for net zero in terms of actions that we would need to take.
Sorry, clarify, so that number is for net zero?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we did stick with our original target of 80 by 50, then presumably that, I know it's a rough estimate, presumably that number would go down.
I don't think that would necessarily be the case. The 80 by 50 is a community target and was not specified specifically for our work. Because there is so much uncertainty in the work, where we will be able to really answer your question in the next plan and the next bit of work is in the actual modeling that staff will be doing and each of the actions as we go forward. So for instance, if we're looking at reducing our GHG consumption in a particular building, so plausibly, here would be a path forward. Plausibly, we would be, let's say, applying for funding. We will not even be considered for funding if we don't have a net zero target. So that's one aspect. I can appreciate that, you want to lead, want to follow, cost or not. If our target is not looking at net zero, we are not likely to be successful. All of the modeling and any of the grant money that is out there is simply for net zero modeling. So, I can't clearly and directly answer your question that if we don't get funding, the cost will be more or less. But whether, Luke is looking at an HVAC replacement that will be 80% or 100%, I can't quantify what that difference will be. I could, once we do the appropriate modeling. My sense is what's useful for the work that has to come is that beacon of net zero, of 100% reduction, of getting to zero. That's the piece of, and as this work moves forward, that would be what the estimates are for. So we'll be in a better position to clearly answer that kind of a question, but I don't think on any national front looking for any funding that it will serve us well to have modeling or a target of less than net zero.
Okay, so and just, sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'm over time, I have one last question. Yeah, thank you. So again, and I guess you might have answered that a bit in terms of the target of zero, but it seems like being a bit of a numbers guy, it does seem a bit arbitrary to me, choosing zero. I'm just wondering if there's, again, I understand a bit of the basic chemistry, but I don't know the science behind it. Is there, I know, oceans, for example, are a bit of a carbon sink, trees sequester carbon, et cetera. Is there an acceptable amount of carbon emissions, like anthropogenic carbon emissions that are acceptable? And is it or not?
So I guess acceptable to whom?
Acceptable in terms of climate change in the long run.
Yeah, so what we're aiming for is not, as a globe, not surpassing the targets, not surpassing the limits that have been identified through very rigorous research. When we understand the target to be in terms of warming is 1.5 to 2 degrees. And so that threshold is exceeded before mid-century. And so the math is indicating that we need to aim for net zero before mid-century. And so that's, as helpful as it is right now, is that it's a necessity to move in that direction.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Riedman, you wanted to add something before I continue down the list?
Yes, through the mayor. I just did want to clarify. So the $250 million is over 25 years. I think it was quoted as 10 years, and so it's about $10 million a year that's identified in the staff report. It is a rough order of magnitude as well, and so what we don't know, we know that there are technological advances that are coming quite quickly, and so that could bring the cost down over time, but then also different inflationary numbers could bring it up. And so right now this is a rough order of magnitude number that we're including just for the purpose of council having an understanding of what the magnitude of our localized costs would be.
Councillor O'Dooney.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I wanted to just start out with City Hall. I know City Hall is not top 3 in terms of GHG emissions, but I also see it as I don't know if I should call it symbol of municipal power or something, and has a lot of influence on how people see what we're doing as a city. What are our plans for City Hall in particular with this? Because I think that could probably dictate how people see how we are currently taking our actions.
You want to take it, B? So I'll, through...
And if that's diving too deep into operations, then no worries, we can...
No, I think, so through the chair, to you, I think it is important, exactly what you've described. City Hall is a community-facing facility, and it is a facility, as we've worked together, really understanding that there are opportunities here. And so I'll point to B to respond to your question. I don't think it's something that's necessarily too deep, just to give you a flavor of the type of work and the possibilities that are within, as an example, this one facility.
Beatrice.
So, through the chair, part of the very large body of work we're doing with capital planning actually relates to City Hall for exactly the reasons you've identified. In the next year or two, we have done a full building condition assessment, an energy audit. We're moving towards a large-scale mechanical study where we'll be looking at GHG reduction pathways, what the cost of those are, what the possibilities are, and also considering how they might integrate with district energy if that happens in the future. There are a lot of unknowns. The price tag is currently high. What we're trying to do is align it with known and required replacements of HVAC equipment. We're also looking at where we can achieve energy efficiencies and those GHG reductions in envelope work, so roofing, walls, the upcoming Spandrel project, and just other energy usage wherever we can do it. So we try to address it through our State of Good Repair program, but also look forward to building more proactive reduction plans.
Thank you. My next question, communication with constituents. I'm sure this is probably part of the plan as well, but how do we get people to care, about this? I mean, we're aware of climate change and some of the issues, and are people aware of the goal of the city, the goal of the region, and also, hey, this might end up affecting your pocket. We're looking at this amount of money over the next 25 years. How do we do that?
So through the chair, continuing on, I think one of the things that's useful is to hear your feedback in today's session about that, what you would like to see us as staff do, bake in to the plan and the work that's coming. So I think that's an important piece of how we engage the community, how we communicate our work, and how we get the support, how you get the support that you need from your constituents to support the work. So I invite you to, your own ideas to capture those today. For us, in terms of behavior change within facilities, as people are in the facility, when you understand the impact that you are having in our facilities, that's helpful. So being able to build in the work that we do, capturing it, speaking to the work that we're doing, and also in your areas, being able to capture the value of the work. And so part of strategic sessions is also, when I ask for that 15 minutes, kindly of your time, it's so that I can convey what we have learned so that you are better positioned to be a champion for the work that we're doing as well. And so I hope that's helpful, and to have that kind of continued work together, because you will, by nature of your roles, be champions for our work.
Okay, thank you. I have 50 more seconds. I'm going to try to squeeze in this last question. So this is probably, I got to grab coffee with Councillor Davey on this one. 250 million, 10 million over 25 years. And from what I also read, it says, 1% increase in taxes could generate 1.4 million in revenue. Will all this, the 10 million per year, is that external funds coming in from taxes, or are we tapping into, I think, reserve funds and several other places? Do we have a proposal of what that could look like over a period of time?
So continuing on through the chair, I think what's important is the kind of question you're asking is about how do we set up mechanisms to fund the work? And in part, that will be part of what the Corporate Climate Action Plan, as we move forward, needs to capture. It needs to begin to assess these options. And so in working closely with Jonathan and Ryan in finance, they are part of this work as well. And so assessing, are these things, is a levy something we have appetite for? Is it operational savings that then in turn, come back to fund a reserve fund? So these mechanisms will have to be assessed, and finding the right ways to fund the work is part of the work of the Corporate Climate Action Plan. It won't be separate from it. That's the aspect, like an example of the integration of the work. So it's fine to have pie-in-the-sky projects, but they have to be paved, in terms of really assessing how it is that we fund them. So I would be happy to hear any of your ideas as you move into that last open-ended session where you can provide comments of mechanisms that you envision. We'll need to begin to assess those as we move forward with the plan.
Sorry, thank you. I've got two more people in the queue, and then I've got one counselor for a second time. I am cognizant of time, and we still have to go through the Menti stuff. So I'm going to do the two who haven't spoken yet, then we'll go to the Menti stuff, and we'll see how we're doing time-wise, because we do need to have our lunch break before we go, before we come back for 1 o'clock. So, Councillor Deneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Aduni stole some of my thunder with his last line of questioning, so thanks for that. I guess my question, is, one of my questions was going to be about convincing the broader community that, spending this money is well spent. They already take us to task a lot for paving roads and paving trails, which I believe there's a greater benefit than what most would see. Is it cheaper? Would it be cheaper or more beneficial if we switched the stages around and we actually offered incentives to homeowners to do their own retrofitting, like Councillor Schneider had mentioned? As opposed to them saying to us, well, why are you spending all that money? My taxes are increasing, my heating bills are increasing, my energy bills are increasing. It's great that your community center and your city halls is nice and up to date, but what about my own household? And so I know, in the past probably dozen years, both provincially and federally, they've provided opportunities for home energy retrofits, and I believe there's been a great uptake in that. But I just wonder if it's more successful to have households do their own homes first, because by those numbers, it seems like they're the greater usage as far as greenhouse gases. And so if that's something we could maybe kind of look at, as opposed to looking at our own facilities first, tackling the older homes and so forth.
Thanks. Through the chair. So I would suggest that it isn't not an either or. And so what we're seeing in the landscape right now is that we are looking at our own facilities. And so the challenges of having, facilities that are from the 60s, for instance, like my home from the 50s, it is a highly efficient home, which isn't saying much for a 1950s home. So the responsibility both with private residents and with corporate entities, it's a responsibility for both. The unique position that municipalities find themselves in is that we have a scope of influence and to some extent control over both. So we are already partnered with organizations, as an example, Reap Green Solutions, on focusing on that residential sector. We are seeking to have them be a one-window service in our community to enable homeowners in particular, as one group of residents, to be able to have some more control and scope of influence over their properties, but also to be able to leverage some additional resources and support to be able to do that. Our role as a municipality in that community-focused work is to utilize the data that exists to best inform where it is that we as an entity put our focus. So as an example, is it focusing on the groupings of neighborhoods and houses that pay more than 6% of their income on utility bills? So that's the strategic play that we have as an organization within that. However, that does not absolve us of our corporate responsibility within our equally, challenged facilities, right? And so we are uniquely positioned as a municipality that we have scope of influence in both. We also have to enable the capacity to be able to do both, and we are.
So, okay, and thank you for your answer. I guess I'm assuming the expectation is of the city that homes or private households will follow suit, or that's the hope at least, that if we as a city, we take on this initiative that, household will say, yeah, you know what, the city's doing this, so I should be doing it. I guess, hopefully that is a good assumption, but, my worry is people are going to say, what about my energy bills? How are you helping me control my energy bills? And that's all. Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks
thank
again.
you.
Okay, Ms. McGoldrick, you wanted to add something?
Perhaps just to Councillor Deneau, just around the community-based targets and support for community to adopt lower energy net zero options. We do have a report coming forward next Monday regarding the Kitchener Utilities energy transition strategy, and that is in terms of the provision of energy to the community and how to support the community through energy transition. And so that's a really good point to bring forward as part of that discussion.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Mayor Verbanwick, and thank you for your presentation. And a lot of great questions that have been raised. And the one thing that, that it does raise a concern to me, and it's the $250 million. To me, it would be something equivalent to two EDA funds that were done, I guess, 20 years, not even 20 years ago, close to 20 years ago. And so, knowing that we need to do these significant investments in our environment and knowing how important that these investments are, and seeing what's in the report, have we ever thought of the unthinkable of maybe selling assets?
I'm not sure that that's a question that we would be discussing here. That's more of an in-camera discussion.
Okay.
So, do you have any other
It's a
questions?
general question, though, I'm not saying anything specific.
Again, I think it's more of an in-camera question, so
And I think through the chair, as you move through the Menti, in that last question, if there are mechanisms, we need to assess mechanisms by which we can fund, in a sense, this energy transition. And so if there's a particular mechanism in mind, we're happy to hear in that last more open-ended opportunity for that kind of question, for that assessment of whatever assets, that one might hold. And so I invite you to list those in earnest, whatever your thoughts are, and we will take all that you mentioned, right, and begin to build the plan. Thank you.
okay, thank you. Mr. Weidman, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, through the mayor. And so while the number is quite high, we know that the current federal government wants to see projects that get towards net zero to fund those through grants and other mechanisms. And so there are those opportunities that we would continue to explore to look at offsetting our local costs through partnerships with other levels of government. and other means. And so layering in facilities replacement aspects, like when a boiler needs to be replaced, looking at just that incremental difference, all those things. And so that is work we will be doing to look at minimizing the impact over time, but we did want to put that order of magnitude in just so council could have an understanding when they're answering some of the other questions, so that we have an understanding of where council's looking to go as we bring forward a plan that looks to achieve at least the 80%, if not more, based on what council feedback we get today.
Okay, great, thank you. Councillor Clancy, I see you're in the queue, but as I said, we're going to do the Menti questions now, and then we'll see how we're doing for time. Okay, so over to you with the questions, please.
Is everyone still able and in? Councillor Chapman, are you successful in getting in? Yeah, okay, so everyone's in. Okay, so you have 3 questions, a bit truncated in terms of what Menti gives space for. Questions are the same sentiment as was in the report.
Should we just go as we...
Yeah, so I think one of the things, we're just going to wake up the screen. The way that this is set up, so we're on question 1 now. To your point, Councillor Singh, I think it's an important one. Let's all record our agreement scale for question 1. We will, the clerk will enable the results, and we will move forward into the next question directly. That way Menti can capture it, because I'm not sure.
So council can go and answer theirs?
Yes, and the clerk can see how many respondents there are. I'm not sure that any of us can, but she can. So she's taken the control of the Menti conch, because I don't have control for that, just the slides.
Has everyone answered?
Oh, yeah.
No, there's 9 of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 9. So somebody hasn't answered.
You capture them, Kate. You're going to capture them.
We know who should be auditors and who shouldn't. We're waiting for one member of council. No, he's trying to log in. Are you in?
Okay, good.
Okay, now we have 9. There we go.
Okay.
Okay, so we're at 3.9 out of 5.
And the clerk will move us to the next question, and you can begin. You will also, I believe, need to proceed to the next question. These are the 3 pathways that I spoke of that Transform WR pointed to, for which I would suggest in our planning is best bets. And like to get your feedback on that.
Two more people. Okay, so folks, you see your answers there. Energy conservation, 4.1, fuel switching, 3.8, and generating local renewable energy, 4.7.
These refer to the 2 focus areas within the organization, the 2 largest contributing to our corporate GHG emission profile.
Okay, so we have a 4.6 on facilities and a 4 on fleet.
Okay, thank you for that. And so this question opens up as a box. This is the moment in looking at this question to take a bit of reflection. You're given a box. You can fill in that box, and then you have two options. If you want to proceed with additional commentary, another word, another sentence, you can forward. There's two, I don't remember the two drop downs. One will end the survey. The other will give you multiple opportunities to kind of collect your thoughts and enter content.
Mr. Reedman, you wanted to, no, you don't want to add anything? Okay.
And we will take what is in this more open-ended as you know, you're gathering what it is that you want to see in the plan. And I think I've heard some things today, but they'll be captured. And I will be able to export it from Menti and begin to consider it as we build the plan. But you have multiple opportunities when you press the right thing to proceed with, whatever the two options are there. What is it that you're looking for in a plan as we build it? And feel free to capture those things that you've mentioned today. That will be supportive to you as your champions and in the hot seat with constituents. And as we build out the details of the plan. What do you need in a plan so we can support you? And you can support this work.
Also, if you go past the two characters, you said that you can do additional?
Yes, so the two drop down, the two buttons at the bottom, one will close you out of the survey, the next will take you to another box, and you can continue on there.
Allows you to resubmit another.
Yes, multiple, unlimited,
Oh, wow, that's great.
as we found out as we tried it.
Kind of think of it as, you know, you get one, maximum 2 5-minute opportunities. So keep it to 2 screens.
And then I'll hand it over to the chair to guide us as you wish through any roundtable.
Is everyone done? Oh, we still have some typing going on.
And likely, I would think that they can continue to type as if we wanted to move into the roundtable. Not sure if the clerk has to close it out yet. Okay. Yeah, see what happens.
Sorry, so the roundtable is to reflect on this?
If there's, depending on how the time is. if
Yeah,
it's okay, if there's any
so-
more to share.
So what maybe I would suggest is that we go around the horseshoe and ask everyone to sort of limit their input to like 1 or 2 words that sort of reflect their response on question 4. And I'm just cognizant of time and everything else that we've got going on today. So we'll start on that side of the horseshoe. So 1 or 2 words reflective of your response to question 4. Oh, sorry, you can click in. Go ahead, Io.
I just wrote down 2 things. The communication plan is something that is of interest to me. I really want us to have a partnership with the residents of Kitchener.
1 or 2 words.
Communication. What's the second one? And financing.
Okay.
Thank you.
That was 3, sorry.
Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, clear targets and expectations, and more district energy biomass generated facilities. Is that
1 or
to
2
remember?
words. Councillor Schneider. I know, it's hard for politicians to stay 1 to 1 or 2, myself included. Councillor Schneider.
I'm good.
What?
I'm good. 1 or 2 words. I'm good with what's on the screen.
Okay,
Oh, okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clancy.
Holistic, so looking at all the different costs and benefits, not just money, and a business case,
Okay.
using that business case.
Councillor Davey.
Bang buck.
Councillor Singh.
Yes, same, best bang for the buck, partnerships and responsible budgeting.
Okay, 2.
Budgeting.
We'll go with the first 2. Councillor Deneau.
Measurable in partnerships.
Councillor Ioannidis, click in.
Technology, financial.
And mine are ambition and innovation. I waited till the end. Okay.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Is that it? Is that the wrap?
That's a wrap. Thanks very
Okay.
much.
Wonderful, thank you. Great work, team, great presentation. I do want to, on top of the amazing work that this whole team did on all of this, I also do want to give a shout out to B, whose son, Ethan, competed this weekend in our Canadian junior cycling team in the Czech Republic. So congratulations. So with that, we now recess, right? And do we do any caucus now, or is that later on? We're doing some now while we're eating, and then back in 1, and then continue. Recess, I know I always take one. Sure, I'll take one, moved by Councillor Davey, seconded by Councillor